Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli and his Algerian counterpart, Ayman bin Abdulrahman, chaired the joint Egyptian-Algerian Business Forum held under the theme Algeria-Egypt, Common History and Denominators in the Service of the Promising Economic Partnership. Madbouli said during the forum that Egypt looks forward to launching a regular maritime line between Egyptian and Algerian ports to boost trade. The meeting was attended by the delegations of the two countries, officials of the trade and industry chambers, and private sector representatives from both countries. The recent agreement between Egypt and Tunisia to work on launching a regular maritime line to move goods between the two countries paved the way to launch a regular maritime line between Egyptian and Algerian ports. Egyptian and Algerian officials concerned have discussed the requirements of the private sectors regarding facilitating movement of goods and flow of capitals between the two countries. Mutual understandings have been reached between Egypt and Algeria to boost trade exchange in a way that suits their production capacities and huge markets, taking into consideration the infrastructure and modern transport means that the increase in trade requires. Egypt aims to increase the share of the private sector investments in total general investments from 30% currently to 65% during the next 3 years. Madbouli also urged Egyptian private sector representatives to increase their investments and partnerships in Algeria to make use of the opportunities in the Algerian market. The Egyptian premier affirmed the need for both the Egyptian and Algerian sides to double the volume of trade exchange in the near future that amounted to $787 million in 2021. Madbouli said it is of the better interest for both countries to achieve integration in order to set up a joint productive and industrial base serving the region. Meanwhile, bin Abdulrahman said Egypt and Algeria have a lot of achievements in different domains, including energy, trade and investment, that made Egypt the second trade partner to Algeria and the third partner in the field of investments. There are 25 Egyptian projects in Algeria in the sector of petrochemicals, communications, electric cables, construction, and agricultural services. He also lauded the Egyptian-Algerian Businessmen Council and efforts to deepen cooperation between the chambers of commerce and industry of both countries. He further stressed that the committee should convene on a regular basis, especially in light of the great importance Sisi and Algerian President Abdelmajid Tebboune give to fostering cooperation between Egypt and Algeria. Egypt also plans to open new spheres for foreign direct investment, including IT, seawater desalination projects, and new and renewable energy. Efforts are underway to prepare for additional incentives for investors who set up in certain areas, including the new administrative capital, New Alamein City, New Mansoura, and the Suez Canal Economic Zone. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Roshdy. Now, you spoke about the governmental companies, you spoke about the prospects of cooperation between both countries in terms of small and medium enterprises, entrepreneurship, and the private sector. Now, having this forum and the joint Egyptian-Algerian Business and Economic Committee, whose job is it more? Who's carrying the bigger load? Is it the private sector or the public sector between both countries, trying to really strengthen the cooperation between both sides? Who should be taking the lead? Now, Egypt is really emphasizing the importance of the private sector internally and putting a lot of the private sector and the public sector companies into the Egyptian stock market. Who has the bigger load?
Actually, it's a smart question. We have to analyze it a little bit. Actually, the agreement or the MOUs between Egypt and Algeria, in a lot of sectors, actually we can say the small and micro-sized enterprises and water, employment, higher education, research, in addition to diplomatic training, environment, youth, sports. It will be divided in two parts, the governmental parts and the private sector. The private sector, I would like to start with the private sector actually, and the most crucial thing, which is the SMEs. In my humble opinion, if you would like to build a strong economy, you have to start with the SMEs. Why SMEs? For example, I would like to elaborate more for our audience. It's kind of how to mitigate the risk. For example, if our economy was built, for example, with two main companies, big companies or multinational companies, if one of them defaulted or there's a bankruptcy, what will happen? We will lose 50% of our economy. This will be a great hit. But if you have a lot of companies or small and medium enterprises, if any one of them defaulted or there's a bankruptcy, nothing will happen. It's automatically someone or another company will enter the market and the market will continue. Accordingly, if you would like to build a solid economy, you have to diversify your resources and your income. Actually, SMEs is the good tool or the smart tool, in my humble opinion, to build an economy, especially for the developing countries. Accordingly, it should be an integration between the private sector and the governmental sector. The governmental sector should put more incentive for SMEs, like what's happening now. For example, the government working closely with CBE, the Central Bank of Egypt, and they have a lot of initiatives. One of them, which is initiative 5% interest rate for some industries, 8% for other industries, despite the fact the lending rate increased, as you know, and our audience, a lot of central banks increased the interest rate to little bit face the inflation, the global inflation. And this is what was happening in our country. Actually, as far as I recall, we increased the interest rate in Egypt the last period 3% actually, 1% and 2% after that, to face the global inflation. Despite this fact, to don't lose the momentum of SMEs, the CBE still is focusing on the initiative of lending SMEs, and they forced on all banks that working in Egypt to have the initiative of 25%. 25%, what is this initiative? That obligatory, you have, the bank should lend 25% of the loans portfolio, of his loan portfolio, for SMEs. This positively would support the economy. In addition to the incentives that the government is putting in the new law to push the SMEs, and in addition to the entrepreneur, they are encouraging entrepreneurship incubators, they are financing it, in addition to the microfinance.
Yes. Well, Dr. Roshdy, you've mentioned the Egyptian Central Bank and the banking system now having 25% allocated for SMEs and entrepreneurship. Now, when the banks go to give the 25% of their loans to SMEs, do they look for, or do they favor the SMEs and the startups that have a goal of exporting or doing or providing services or whatever products they are working on internationally, exporting it outside of Egypt, more than the SMEs that are focusing mainly on the domestic Egyptian market?
Actually, the Central Bank of Egypt, they are working with both of companies, the one which will export, in addition to the one which will cover the internal consumption for the Egyptian population. And this is, I believe, it's quite smart to serve all sectors, and this will help us to reach our goals, our sustainability goals, and to achieve 2030 sustainability goals, which one of them, which is sustainable financing.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as Dr. Roshdy has mentioned, the Egyptian government is working on achieving the financial sustainability and sufficiency by 2030. And during the current crises taking place in the world, Egypt is looking to strengthen its trade and economic cooperation with different countries, even that countries that are not mainly involved within the global crises. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my distinguished guest, Dr. Mohamed Roshdy, the economic and banking expert. Dr. Roshdy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for
Thank you very much, sir.
invitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.